How can you practice wise effort from a biopsychosocial perspective? That's what we're going to explore today in this closet cleanout episode of Your Life in Process. If you haven't checked it out yet, go to wiseefforttogether.com right now, wiseefforttogether.com, and check out the event that we're going to be offering October 20th through 22nd. It includes keynote talks from Stephen Forges, Jack Cornfield, Kate Johnson on this topic of wise effort, many others, scientists, Marcella Matos, as well as conversations with wise effort ambassadors, these sort of short conversations about how they're living out wise effort in their life. I'm offering wise body practices of meditation and breathwork and yoga. And then all of it is being distilled down into some handouts and some worksheets, things that you can take away, tangible pieces of work so that you can apply this in your life. Go sign up now, wiseefforttogether.com, and I cannot wait to see you all there. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Diana Hill. This is Your Life in Process. I'm a psychologist and here to help you develop more psychological flexibility, wise effort in your life. And we are closing out season 5, folks. Episode number 80 something. This is amazing. We've gotten this far, and I think it's time for a little closet clean out. The other day I was cleaning out my closet and I found the cutest dress. It's got clouds on it. It's a little halter top. It's light and flowy for a hot day. I'm wearing it right now in honor of this episode. That's the closet clean out episode, because sometimes it's helpful to go back to what we already have and take a look at it again and see it with fresh eyes, try it on, and see that we already have a lot of the resources and ideas that we need to be able to live effectively in our lives, live with psychological flexibility. So we're going to do a closet cleanout episode, and I got the help from my good friend, Dr. Laura Fielding from Mastering Adulthood. She listened to a lot of Your Life in Process episodes for me. She pulled out some of her favorite snippets, and then I put them together in this way that is looking at the concept of wise effort. This has been the season of wise effort on the show. Wise effort being about curiosity, getting curious about what is working for you in your life, getting curious about what is not working for you, your cycles of avoidance and control, as well as getting curious about what you want your life to be about. What are your values? What would bring your life more purpose and meaning? And wise effort is about flexibility, applying psychological flexibility so that you can pursue those goals that you want. And that involves things like acceptance and willingness to experience discomfort, as well as try on new behaviors, adding some variability to your patterns so that you don't get stuck in doing the same thing over and over again. And wise action is the third component of wise effort. Wise action has to do with taking action in your life, getting out that dress and putting it on and wearing it, not just looking at it, right? And what that looks like in small, daily little patterns that you create, that you reinforce, new habits, new behaviors, as well as the big leaps that you take. So in this episode, I'm going to be going back in time and play some snippets from folks that I've talked to. And as we go through them, I want you to think about a problem that you're facing in your life right now. Something that maybe you're stuck in that's causing you a lot of distress, maybe something that you want to get started, but you're not able to get started. And I want you to take these teachings on curiosity, flexibility, and wise action to your problem and see if it can shift it a little bit. So we're going to get started with Dr. Judd Brewer, neuroscientist, psychiatrist, researcher at Brown University, and hopefully familiar to you at this point on the show. And he's going to deconstruct this concept of curiosity. As you listen to him, think about your problem with this angle of curiosity, this angle of interest curiosity.
If you look at curiosity itself, we can be curious about like, oh, where do I find fulfillment versus not? And double click on that, like, what is fulfilling? Because I think there's a huge pressure in whether it's consumerism or growth economies or whatever, in this Western culture around be more, get more, do more. And then somehow that's going to equal happiness. And yet that just leads to the well-trodden and well-known hedonic treadmill, right? And so even though that phenomena is known, people haven't gotten off of it. And so I would say that curiosity can help all of us ask, am I just on this hedonic treadmill? And what is happiness? There are two types of curiosity. One is deprivation curiosity and one is interest curiosity. I like the names because they're pretty descriptive. So deprivation is when we're deprived of information. And I think of it this way, when our stomach is empty, it rumbles and it says, go get some food. There's a dopamine drive there that's motivating, and that's been well characterized. And analogously, and literally in a similar way, when we are deprived of information, our brain rumbles, so to speak, and we feel this itchy urge to go get that information. And we've studied this phenomenologically, where, and others have as well, deprivation curiosity feels more closed down, contracted, driven, because it's saying go get information, right? Whereas interest curiosity is more that just the joy of discovery. And so you can think of it as, our eyes are narrowed when we're frustrated or angry. Oh, I got to get that information. Versus our eyes are wide open when we're just curious about something. Oh, let me look a little bit, more. If it's something, if I'm looking at a flower or some bark on a tree, it's like, I'm not narrowing my eyes, I'm opening them to get more information in. And so it's like being receptive, being flexible, being open to receiving information. And that's, I would love to see the brain imaging, but I would put a ton of money on that is not a dopaminergically driven process. It feels very different.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think about that in terms of people. So deprivation curiosity is, I wonder how old Dr. Judd is. Is Dr. Judd married? What is Dr. does he have, we know you have cats, but what kind of cats does he have? And those could be, you could go Google those things and get those answers pretty quickly. Whereas interest curiosity is like, I wonder what makes Dr. Judd tick, and how did this lead to that? And it leads to more and more and more questions about who you are. And if you're the receiver of interest curiosity, it's much more engaging and connecting than be the receiver of someone that's just deprivation curious about you. Like, what can I get from you versus I'm interested in you? So I could see that relationally, this in the field that I work in, I think about that relationally. When I'm working with a client, I could interview them for the purposes of a diagnosis, which may be a little bit more deprivation curiosity. Like, are they meeting these symptoms? And I can check those boxes. Or I could also interview them with a stance of curiosity. How do all these pieces work together as a system that are contributing to this person's problem? And what are the biopsychosocial, sort of network aspects to this human? Hi, I'm Dr. Dinah Hill. Thank you so much for joining me with Your Life in Process. And if you want more, if you're interested in applying these processes to your daily life, join me at my membership, More Life in Process. At More Life in Process, you will get meditations for you to practice at home. You'll get extra bits from the episode that maybe got recorded after the fact. You're going to get PDFs and handouts, things that you can use to apply your daily practice to your life. And I can't wait to see you there. $5 a month, $50 for the year. You can go to yourlifeinprocess.com to sign up. So Dr. Jed encourages us to look at things from the angle of interest curiosity, eyes open, leaning in. What is going on here? And if you think about your problem and you were to start to look at it with interest curiosity, you may also start to get curious about what are the biopsychosocial factors that are influencing it. In process-based approaches, we look at networks, we look at complex networks. Whatever you're experiencing, there's a lot of different factors that are playing a role in your experience. At the very base of it all is your physiology, the biophysiological factors, things like how well are you sleeping and what's your diet look like and your movement patterns, and also your nervous system. If you've experienced a lot of threat or trauma in your life, your nervous system may be a little bit on edge, a little more sympathetic, or maybe you're going into sort of a shutdown response. That plays a role in your problem, in your ability to navigate and adapt and shift and change. So we can start to get curious about the biophysiological factors that are related to your problem. You could also get curious about the psychological factors, the social cultural factors, the environmental factors. And I actually have a handout for those that are members of More Life in Process that I'm going to upload to the membership that comes from the workshop that Joe Sorochi and I just did on process-based interventions that lists a ton of different examples of biological factors of social cultural factors, of environmental factors, and of psychological factors that you can start to assess for yourself. So next up, we're going to listen to Deb Dana about a different type of curiosity, which is getting curious about your nervous system. And I learned a lot from Deb Dana in this episode. She has such a beautiful way of breaking things down into understandable polyvagal theory. I've also learned a lot from Stephen Porges, and Stephen is on the Wise Effort Together Summit talking about polyvagal theory. And it's helpful to get the Deb Dana background before you listen to the Stephen Porges, the founder of polyvagal theory, on your nervous system, because she sets the framework. So she'll describe to us what our vagus nerve is, and then also how we can start to apply what's called the vagal brake. And this is you bringing curiosity to your nervous system, what's happening in terms of your physiology, things that you aren't always aware of. We also want to get curious about, because it's influencing how we are acting, how we're relating, how we're thinking, how we're feeling. Let's listen to Deb Dana.
The vagus nerve is, and vagus is Latin for wandering, and it really does wander throughout our body. It begins in our brainstem and then wanders down through our heart, our lungs, into our digestive system. The whole length of the vagus goes brainstem down around all the way down, right? And then it comes in two parts. So we have ventral vagus, which is what we were just talking about, that system that really brings us into social engagement, into feeling safe with others and on our own, right? Because it's not just social; it's also solitude. Right. It's those lovely moments of stillness that are nourishing as well. The hallmark of ventral is a neuroception of safety. And so there's so many flavors of ventral. Let's think about those for a minute. There can be the calm, but there can also be the passion and the joy. There can be the ease. There can be the ready to do this interview, right? Ready to have this conversation. So there's an alertness and also an ease, right? So lots of different flavors. And I love talking about that because people often think ventral is calm because the opposite is stress, right? And there are just so many flavors of ventral that are fun to explore. You look at kids; kids have so many flavors of ventral, right? They're playful, they're joyful, they're artistic, they're focused. It's fun to see all those flavors, and we have the same as adults. So that's ventral. And we talked a bit about the sympathetic, and you illustrated it so beautifully. You feel like, oh, I don't belong. I'm a misfit. What am I doing? I can't talk. You've got all this energy that's flooding, and is you can't organize. So it then loses its purpose. Right? We have lots of energy in ventral, but it's organized and purposeful. It's taking us somewhere. It's sympathetic. It's just chaotic all over the place. Right? Yeah. And then if we go, if sympathetic doesn't help us escape the problem, resolve what's happening, we have that other place in the nervous system, which again is vagus, but is dorsal vagal. And so, and that again is what Steve really mapped in polyvagal theory. We have these two aspects of the vagus. We have ventral, which we talked about, and now dorsal, that we'll talk about. And dorsal is the place where, we collapse, we disconnect. The energy drains from our system. We kind of go through the motions, but we're not really present doing it. Right. And I know every time I talk about it, I can feel it beginning to come up in my system. My voice changes. My breathing changes. Right. And what, polyvagal theory shows us is that it's a very common place for people to go. Right. In fact, we visit all of these states in small ways all the time. Right. In big ways when we're really challenged, but in small ways all the time.
So part of getting curious is getting curious about your nervous system. And when you think about this problem, what state your nervous system goes into around it? Or do you go into a state of sympathetic where you have a lot of threat and arousal? Do you feel the ventral vagus nerve being activated? Do you feel safe and engaged and are able to be playful? Or are you going into what Deb Dana describes as dorsal, which is this she describes it as going down the drain. You kind of go into shut down and freeze up and become immobilized. And the key here is that you're always going to be moving in and out of these states, but how can you be more of the orchestrator of the vagal break? In the episode, we talked about some really basic ways to be able to regulate your nervous system. Things like focusing on your exhale, things like movement, music and sound. And at the Wise Effort Together Summit, Stephen Porges is going to offer us some new ones, one that I hadn't ever heard before. So you'll have to attend to listen to that. But paying attention, getting curious about your nervous system, and then learning how to use these different sets of tools to help you regulate it so that you can be flexible in your behavior. That's what we're going to talk about next is flexibility. So we have curiosity, and then we have flexibility as a central part of Wise Effort. And one of the places that we need flexibility that also is related to your physiology is actually the flexibility of your brain. I talked to Kimberly Wilson, who specializes in brain health and nutrition. And she wrote the book on Processed, as well as How to Build a Healthy Brain. I adore her work. She's super fun. She was also a finalist on the Great British Bake Off. And she talks about our brain health and the nutrient that you need most in order to support flexibility in your brain and decrease inflammation, which we know is related to your mental health, to your concentration, to your overall well-being. So let's listen to nutritional psychologist Kimberly Wilson talk about DHA, omega-3 fatty acids, and your brain health.
So DHA is quite unusual in terms of its flexibility. So it has this incredibly long structure. It's very unsaturated. So there's lots of kind of empty chairs in the analogy, which means actually it can fold into these different configurations. The reason that is important for brain health is because what it provides to your brain cell membrane is fluidity. And the reason you want fluidity, the analogy I quite like is if you imagine your brain or even your brain cells as a busy restaurant, you're going to have customers and ingredients coming in and they get used up and converted and served. And then you've got waste products being created that needs to be removed. And what you want really is doors that work so that the customers and ingredients can get in and you can get rid of the buildup of that waste. And some of that waste can be toxic to brain cells. So that's that membrane fluidity. You can imagine those are good swinging doors that open and let the things that you want in and the things that you want out to be taken away. And when you don't have good membrane fluidity, then you have problems with getting things like amino acids and energy into the cell and removing the buildup of toxic proteins and other toxic waste, which can damage the function of the cell. So there's something really important about having that membrane fluidity. But then also DHA is very conductive. It helps to conduct an electrical charge, which is essentially everything that your brain cells do. And it's kind of pretty much better than other fats at doing this. So in order to function in terms of the cell body, but also to send messages from one cell to another, which is all of your thoughts, your hopes, your dreams, your ambitions, your goals, your actions, then you need DHA. And then the other omega-3 fatty acid, EPA, is really important for managing inflammation and helping to ensure that, there is this kind of management of inflammation in the body. And in fact, lots of people talk about inflammation and we tend to think about inflammation almost as a fire, a fire that rages, it goes up and then it runs out of fuel and kind of peters out. But that's actually not how it works. Inflammation has to be switched off. It's much more like a light switch that gets switched on and then it has to be actively turned off before you're able to get resolution of inflammation. And the compounds that turn off inflammation are derivatives of EPA, the omega-3 fatty acid. So if you're not getting enough of these fats, you simply can't make what are called pro-resolving molecules, resolving of that inflammation. You can't make enough of them. And then you're much more likely to have this ongoing level of inflammation in your body. And that's what we don't want. And so the low intake across our population of these omega-3 fats are a concern in terms of the structure of our brain cells, the ability of them to communicate with one another, and also the kind of regulation and modulation of that inflammatory response.
Flexible brain cells, folks. We all need flexible brain cells to be able to make wise decisions. And we also need flexibility with our psychology. In your psychological world, there's your thoughts, there's your feelings, there's your self-stories, there's your motivations, there's the actual behavior that you are engaging in, there's your attention, and there's your ability to be able to be with what's uncomfortable and maybe relate to it differently in the way that you've been relating to it. If you go back to your problem, we've looked at your problem in relationship to getting curious about it. We've looked at your problem in terms of your nervous system, getting curious about how your nervous system is when you're facing this problem. Maybe you need to up your brain health a little bit and eat differently to support you with this problem. But probably the most impactful episode for me this season was a conversation with Dr. Richard Schwartz, where you can start to learn to look at your problem through the perspective of parts. And really that many of us try and avoid parts of ourselves, but when we can integrate them and we can have conversations, especially with the parts that we don't feel as great about, we can utilize their strengths, we can work with them differently. And as you're thinking about the problems that you struggle with, I imagine there's many different parts that are showing up and you may be shoving some underground. So take a listen to Dr. Richard Schwartz, the founder of Internal Family Systems, talk about parts work. And this is a practice of getting more flexible with the many different versions of you, the many parts of you.
It's a dangerous neighborhood, and I don't want to go in there. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's the attitude most of us have about not wanting to go certain places inside. And we spent a lot of time and energy trying to avoid those places, not feel what we had to feel back in the traumas. And so we tend to then exile the parts of us that are still stuck in those places and carrying those feelings we don't want to feel again. They become what we call exiles. And once you get a lot of those parts, you have this big inner basement full of pain and terror and worthlessness that you never want to feel again. Then a lot of other parts are forced out of their naturally valuable states to become protectors to keep all that contained. And those are the parts you're speaking about when you say, why would I even want to think about going there? And those parts manage your life so that those exiles never get triggered. And so you can function. So they might focus on making you look perfect so people don't reject you, or achieve a lot so you get accolades to counter the worthlessness, or take care of everybody so that they depend on you, but this part doesn't let you take care of yourself, or the critics who are either trying to make you perfect or are trying to tear you down so that you don't get hurt, you don't show yourself, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of what we call manager protectors that are trying to manage, it's known as the ego in other circles. Just they're trying their best to keep you safe and to keep these exiles contained. Doesn't always work. So if you do get triggered and some of those flames of exile emotion come floating out, rushing out, there's another set of parts who have to go into action immediately to get you away. And so, you work with eating disorders. So that would be the binge maybe, or even the anorexic part sometimes. But, they're trying to get you higher than the flames, or they're trying to distract you till they burn themselves out. And we call those firefighters. So that's the map to the territory. It's pretty simple. Exiles are these young, vulnerable parts that carry these burdens we never want to feel again, so we lock them up. And then to keep them contained and protected, we have managers and firefighters, both of which are under the umbrella of protectors. And so our approach is to honor all those parts for their service and how much they've tried, even though it backfires a lot of times or they're screwing up your life in a lot of ways. They're all trying their best.
I love that. They're all trying their best. And how can you eventually get them to dialogue with each other, work together? That's what Richard Swartz did with me in a demonstration real play on that episode. You should go back and listen to it if you haven't. He's a master therapist demonstrating a very sophisticated way of working with our different parts. And when you start to get more flexible with yourself, you can see the ways in which you've maybe avoided parts of yourself that you don't like that really may be of benefit to you if you turn towards them and listen to them a little bit. So going back to your problem, there's physiological aspects to your problem. There are psychological aspects, like Dr. Richard Swartz was just talking about. And there's also social aspects. There's ways in which maybe your problem is related to your interactions with others. Maybe it's related to difficulty asserting your needs or setting boundaries or being heard. And flexibility means finding that sweet spot, the places where maybe you're too rigid, maybe you have boundaries that are needing to be loosened up a little bit, or maybe you're too soft. Maybe you have some boundaries that need to be tightened up a little bit with other people. So I talked to the boundary expert of all experts, Nedra Tawwab. Everybody loves Nedra. And I asked her about her relationship with boundaries. We talked about porous boundaries versus rigid boundaries and where she lies in that spectrum. In thinking about your problem, where do you lie? Do you need some boundaries to help you be able to navigate this problem more effectively? Boundaries with other people, maybe even boundaries with yourself? Or do you need to loosen up a little bit, get a little bit more flexible? Let's listen to what Nedra had to say.
I'm trying to think of how to think of this. I think I'm mostly healthy with a little bit of rigid. I probably say no before I say yes. Like sometimes my team will say, "Do you no?" And then they'll tell me what it is. I'm like, oh, "Okay, yeah." So I err on no more than yes because I do realize the limited amount of time, capacity, and energy that I have. I am a mother of two. As soon as I finish this interview, my children will be home. So I'm on to, something else. So I use no quite a bit. Um, and I think the people in my life know that when I say yes, I really, really mean it. I'm enthusiastic about it. It is a sign that I am all into it. I jump in to help people, but I do it in ways that work for me. I cannot be committed to maybe a weekly commitment, but I can step in occasionally. So I've learned my limits through saying yes too much. Um, because I am in so many spaces, people have a lot of requests. And there was a time when I would be so mad at strangers and other people. Why are they asking me this? Don't they know I'm a mom and I have this? And I had to say, Nedra, they don't know. You know that. You know what your calendar looks like. You know what you have to do when you get off of work. You know when you need to wash your hair. You know all of those things. They don't know. And so, because they don't know, you will have to tell them that you're not available. You cannot do it and not be mad at folks for asking because it makes sense that they would ask. They don't know your capacity. I am the person with the calendar and with, many balls in the air. And I have had to learn to say no and not overcommit. I would say mostly it's healthy and sometimes I can be a bit rigid around, not taking on new opportunities because I don't want to burn out. Really love the space I'm in and I try to protect it so much so that I might say no a bit too much.
I loved how Nedra talked about protecting the space that you are in. This is very much in line with wise action. Sometimes our action is to protect ourselves, protect other people, and that can be setting limits and boundaries. And wise action is about compassionate action. I had the opportunity to talk with Marcela Matos. She's also on the Wise Effort Together Summit because I loved our conversations so much. She's such a delight and one of the main players in compassion research globally. Marcela is a researcher in Portugal, and she did one of the biggest studies on fears of compassion during COVID, where she looked at over 21 different countries in terms of how fears of compassion were impacting mental health and well-being. Marcela is also an expert on shame. And when we look at the places that need compassion the most, it's often the places within ourselves that we feel shame about. So bringing this concept of wise effort to our psychology again, we can look at wise action in relationship to the parts of us that feel rejected or excluded or harmed by others. Let's listen to Marcela Matos talk about the science of shame and bringing wise action, compassionate action to our shame spots.
Shame is rooted in our evolved socially competitive motives. So our motives to compete within a group with each other. And arises from the fact that we are, as human beings, a species that is self-aware, that is able to form an identity, and is a highly social species. So we have, as humans, innate motives to form attachment to others, to belong to groups, to want to be seen in a positive light by others. So we all want to be seen as positively in the minds of others. So to be regarded fondly by others, to be wanted, to be chosen by others. And basically, shame emerges as a warning signal that that's not happening. So shame emerges when something happens that makes you believe that you are at risk of being rejected, of being excluded, of being persecuted, or even harmed by others. And if we think about this, evolutionarily, this would be a huge threat for human beings. So that's why shame, even though it is a secondary order emotion, as you said earlier on, shame comes along with primary emotions like fear, anxiety, anger, disgust. And this has to do with the fact that shame activates our threat system because it is the primary signal that we have that alerts us for social threats. Threats of being rejected, excluded, criticized, humiliated, scorned by others. And it prompts us to do something about it. So the defensive maneuvers that come along with shame, be it the bodily responses, the slumped shoulders, heart racing, high gaze avoidance, all of the bodily experiences that we have, which are very threat focused, but also entail this submissiveness response, are all directed into de-escalate potential social conflict towards repair damage to a social bond, to appease others, and to restore one's self-image in the front of others. And the behavioral responses that come along with shame, such as hiding, submit to others, escape, withdraw from the situation, all of those are part of this defensive repertoire that it's activated when shame is triggered.
And when we engage in those defensive behaviors of hiding, not talking about something that's shameful, isolating, slumping down, not looking someone in the eyes, that's actually what keeps the shame going, because we don't actually get the repair of someone touching your hand, feeling that it's sweaty and being okay with it. I had a really early memory of when I was dating my husband, going to the beach with him, and I was wearing a bathing suit, and there was like right on the side of your like where your armpit meets your chest, there was like this chunk of fat that was sticking out the bathing suit. And I remember my husband going and like poking it with his finger and being like, "That's so cute." And it was this initial shame, but then it had a repair quality to it. He was seeing some part of me that I thought was ugly in a different light. And that's a lot of what happens with, I think, the repairs that we can do in therapy or the ways that we can repair shame, but it has to be exposed in order to be repaired. There's a lot of courage to approach our shame, but then also approaching our shame generates more courage. Seeing the parts of ourselves that we think are ugly from a perspective of compassion is very healing to those parts, to our shame. And I imagine that the problem that you've been thinking about through this episode may have some layers of shame or embarrassment, fear, anxiety, anger, and bringing this compassionate perspective that Marcella talks about in the episode to those feelings, to those experiences, to those memories can really transform them. And that is wise action, to bring compassion to yourself, which is a stance of being able to be with suffering and to do something to alleviate it. And when we do that, when we have compassion for ourselves, we can also start to take compassionate action towards others and seeing that we are connected to others. Our well-being is connected to other people's well-being. And one of the conversations that I had around that I really loved was a conversation with Sonya Looney, who's a friend. At the time, we were just developing our friendship, and now we're really good friends, which is super fun. She's a professional mountain biker, world champion mountain biker. She's a mom. She's also a coach, a performance coach, and she's working on her master's in positive psychology, working directly with Barbara Fredrickson and Martin Seligman. She really is a badass. And she talked about competition. And when we think about wise action, sometimes it is to pursue things that are at the edge of our performance capabilities, really pushing ourselves to the limit. And how do we do that in a way that is wise, that doesn't break us down or break other people down? Let's listen to Sonya Looney talk about competition and wise action.
Our relationship with competition can be different in different areas, and it can change over time. So initially, competition was an evaluation of how good of a person I was. So whenever I was at my first races as a pro mountain biker, and I became a pro very quickly upon starting the sport. So maybe I hadn't had time to emotionally mature enough to be on those start lines. But I would be crying in my bike races. I wouldn't be at the front. I would be in the back of the race crying because I was so embarrassed and because I thought I sucked. And so competition wasn't a good place for me. And then I was at a place where I had to go get all my own sponsors, and there's very limited resources, especially for women in my sport. So women were catty and not nice to me and made comments about my body and things like that just was really upsetting to me. And that made me want to feel, pull back and not feel very good. So competition was zero sum. It was, I don't want somebody to get my piece of the pie. And my husband was actually really helpful in this. He said, hey, it's not about making the pie smaller because you're taking, it's about making the pie bigger. So how can you help other people? And that's something that I always think about. And that doesn't mean that I don't feel a restricted feeling whenever I am helping somebody when they're more, maybe they're more successful at the same thing that I'm working at. And that happens. But I have to ask myself, what type of person do I want to be? And so when I think about competition, I ask myself, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be somebody that brings everybody else up around me, even if that means that I don't gain like somebody else? And that, again, that is a really challenging place to be. But that has helped me so much. And that is how I now approach competition, because I compete in everything that I do. But competition is an opportunity for me to put myself among the best, and maybe I'll get the best out of myself from it. So that's how I now view competition, but it hasn't always been that way. It's been a genesis.
Oh my gosh. I want to just cut that out and listen to it every day. It was so good. I love the concept of making the pie bigger, making the pie bigger. And that comes from just a different mindset, right? Not having the scarcity mindset, but more having a mindset of mudita, of sympathetic joy, happiness when other people succeed, and happiness when you succeed as well. So we've talked about wise effort in relationship to curiosity, to flexibility, and now wise action. And in our closet clean out here, I went way back and found probably my favorite. Are we allowed to have favorites? I do have lots of favorites. I often say things are my favorites because I have multiple favorites, but favorite children, favorite flowers, favorite colors. But really, my favorite is Kelly Wilson. Many of you know that I found my way to act through Kelly Wilson and through his vulnerable, broken heart that I just related to so much. And in this conversation, Kelly talked about everything from forgiveness to starting again to a lifelong struggle of addiction and relationships and love. But the part that I pulled out in this closet clean out that I thought was really relevant to wise action is making a valued life with the simple things, the little things, and how that looks in terms of the small moves that we do in our day that make life a little bit better for ourselves, make life a little bit better for others. We don't have to win mountain bike races to do this, or write books, or do research studies with thousands and thousands of people. Sometimes it's as simple as just getting up and tending to the needs of the day. So let's listen to the very wise Kelly Wilson.
It's complicated being a human being. And so what to do next? And so for me, I think of mattering, of valuing as, for whatever else it is, evolving, like the practicalities of living a valued life are an evolving thing. So really early on, that was a guiding light for me. Like when I was very first in recovery, I had a $4 an hour job. You know, I went to my job at 6 o'clock in the morning, and my job was to get the guys up at this small group home for, they were deinstitutionalizing some, adults, young, middle-aged adults who had spent their entire lives in large institutions for people with intellectual disabilities. So my job was I would go in, I'd get the guys up, get them, showered and dressed and food, so that they could then go to their it was kind of a work simulation environment, like a day program that they went to. And I had a little time before I would go. I would start working. I would just be there, and it would just be me sitting in the dark, So I'm out of rehab like a month, and I have no confidence at all that I'm actually going to stay in recovery, because I have no history of staying in, or, of quitting, except sort of partially this or that. Like, I quit shooting dope in 1979, but I didn't quit doing dope in 1979. So, like I didn't have a lot of faith in that. And so it was really small. It was just sort of like, I would sit in the dark, and I've got a book up on my shelf that has some of these little yellow Post-it pads. And I would kind of meditate on, like, if just today I could like not break anything, if just today I could like not hurt anyone, if I could just do my job, that would be pretty great. And I would just sit, there in the dark, talking to, I don't know who I was talking to. Just, God help me remember to not hurt anyone today. Just get me to bedtime. And it was a small practice. But a miracle happened. Really, like this person who had been high every single day since he was 15 years old got a year, got 2 years, got 3 years, got 4 years, graduated from college, got into a PhD program. But it really, and that kind of sitting in the dark as a metaphor also describes like a kind of key to my doing psychotherapy. Like when I sit with someone, like I assume no matter how dark it is, no matter what the circumstances are, that there is something possible for them. And I just wonder about that relentlessly. I am deeply curious about that. that practice that from winter of 1985, that practice lives in me still today. It's aimed at different things, and I've learned to offer it to other people. I sort of found out who I was and what I valued, to be attentive and faithful to the needs of the day. You know, not to some story about the day, you know, but, you know, faithful and attentive to the needs of the day. That process has taken me here, that and all them bullets that missed.